How to feel good and how not to, the ethics of using marijuana, alcohol, antidepressants, and other mood-altering drugs. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. John-Mark Miravalle. He is a Catholic husband and father, professor of systematic and moral theology at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Maryland. And he's also the author of Beauty, What It Is and Why It Matters, Thinking Clearly, Catholic Philosophy for a Culture in Chaos, The Drug, the Soul, and God. And the book we're going to be discussing today, How to Feel Good and How Not to, the Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs. You can get it at the publisher's website, sophiainstitute.com, or your local Catholic bookstore, or wherever you find books. Dr. John-Mark Miravalle, always great to be with you. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm great, Jim. Thanks so much for having me, as always.
Awesome. Yeah, really looking forward to the discussion here, and maybe we'll get the phone number out in a little bit. So if anybody has questions on this topic, I would love to invite you to call in and be a part of the discussion. But I guess I'd like to begin just at the tail end of the book. In the last chapter, before the conclusion, you kind of sum it up this way. You say, people are taking drugs to feel good and to stop feeling bad. They're doing it more and more. It's becoming increasingly legal and increasingly normalized, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. The only way to tell if the ingestion of a chemical is a good thing is to see how we're made and what we're made for. So maybe we can start there. Can you help us to start to understand this, start to wrestle with this and gain some light here? How are we made and what are we made for?
So one of the terms that comes up a lot when you talk about psychology or people doing well or doing badly in life is the term functional. Is someone functional? Are they a functioning alcoholic? Do they function well on a drug? Do they not function? Do they become dysfunctional? The problem is that the word functional is often not defined. It just sort of means, can you get by? But of course, we weren't created to get by. We were created with a certain end, a certain purpose, a certain goal. And all our faculties, every aspect of our soul and body was created with a function, with a purpose, with an end. So when we talk about what counts as being functional and whether you can use a drug in a way that enhances your functionality, we really can't do anything else properly than begin with talking about what are we made for and what is our purpose. And the fact is, the purpose of our lives, the purpose of our design, and the purpose of all our faculties is union with God. So that has to be the starting point. Do these drugs help develop our faculties so that we become more fit for being united to God? If so, great. If not, then we got to do without them.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you give us a few categories to think through here. What are the categories that we want to be paying attention to in terms of how one might be using any sort of drug? You're really highlighting in this book marijuana, the ethics of using marijuana, alcohol, and antidepressants most prominently. But yeah, give us, I guess, some of the categories here that we need to be thinking through.
Good. So the category that I want to focus on is the category of use. That is, what are you trying to do with the drug? So just to clear the air, there's no such thing as an evil chemical. There's no such thing as an evil compound or an evil plant. But there are evil uses of compounds and evil uses of plant based on whether or not they harmonize with our purpose, with our function, with our design. So I'd like to distinguish three kinds of uses of these chemicals, of these psychoactive drugs. The first is where you're using it therapeutically to reduce some kind of reaction that's gotten out of control. The second is where you're using it recreationally to try to induce an experience like pleasure or delight. And then the third use is actually where you're not using it as a psychoactive drug at all, even if it has the potential for psychoactive effects. You're simply using it as a regular ingestible, as a drink or an edible. And those are the three classes of use that I think it's very important to distinguish morally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess using going with alcohol first. When we think about alcohol and the way we might use alcohol, or I guess participate with alcohol. I don't know the right terminology here. I guess use it, make use of it, utilize it. What are the how can we do it in a good way? How would it be morally good and good for us? How might it be morally bad and bad for us?
Yeah, alcohol, I think, is a great example to start with, because alcohol is one of those substances that we actually use in all three ways. And let's take the normal way. Historically, maybe not today, but historically, alcohol was often just used as a good drink. It was something that you drank at meals. It wasn't something that you used to affect your mood. So, for instance, even still, when I have people come over to the house, I will say, what can I get you a drink? You want a bubbly water? You want a glass of whiskey? You want a beer? You want a glass of wine? And I say it all the same way, like, what would you like to drink for its taste and its goodness? And if somebody said to me, this tastes good, but I'm not noticing it affect me yet, so it doesn't seem to be working, I would take that as, no one's ever said that to me in my house. And if they did, I would take the drink away from them. So I think that's a really important distinction to make. If they're using the whiskey or the wine that I'm giving them to drown their sorrows, if they're using it to self-medicate, that's a little alarming. And for sure, if they say, hey, let's get this party started, line up 5 shots of tequila, they're going to have to leave my house, because that is a recreational use where they're trying to stimulate a bogus sense of delight chemically, instead of through appreciating what is true and good.
Okay. All right. Very good. And then in terms of, I guess once we get into the area of calling, and you don't really necessarily get into this in the book of parsing things out by saying how grave a sin something may be, or you kind of, I guess you don't get into a lot of clarity there, because for whatever reason. But I guess if there is somebody wondering right now, I guess you can tell what's sinful, what isn't here. But there are people out there that still want to justify that third category, that recreational use of alcohol, that reckless use of alcohol, as you talk about it. They still want to try to find ways to say, well, it's not so bad. So I guess, is there anything we can definitively look to say whether or not you are actually crossing into a level of grave sin, of mortal sin?
Yeah, so I would suggest let's leave gravity for a second and just talk about sort of the objectivity, because, of course, gravity and objectivity don't always go together. Let's talk about the objectivity of it. If I am trying to detach my faculties, not only of intellect, but also of feeling, away from reality, and I'm trying to induce a hallucinatory pleasure, well, that's similar to trying to induce a hallucinatory image through something like, acid. It's bad because it's detaching not only the mind, but the emotions from reality. And remember, our mind and our emotions are meant to respond to reality so that one day they can eventually respond to the ultimate reality, who is God. So detaching our faculties, and certainly trying to detach our faculties from reality by trying to induce sort of hallucinatory either image or emotional responses, that is a serious matter at a certain point, because you're really acting against the divine end for which our faculties were made.
Yeah, and you do mention in here how it is listed in the New Testament along a various lines, a litany of sins that that are grave sins, and so drunkenness is in there. But yeah, I mean, I think that you give good categories here, and so we all ought to be striving towards that first category with whatever degree we utilize alcohol. It ought to be for the just the enjoyment of the drink itself, and then we bring the virtue of temperance to bear on that. Anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, again, just to remember that if you are using alcohol to make you appreciate something else, that appreciation isn't genuine. What I find very helpful is to imagine you went up to a woman and you said, you know, I'm really struggling to appreciate your beauty. In fact, I don't see it very clearly at all. People say you're attractive. I just can't find it. But I'm going to have a six-pack, and then I think I'll really appreciate your beauty. She would not be grateful for your drunken appreciation of her beauty, because she knows that chemically stimulated appreciation of truth, goodness, or beauty is not genuine. So we shouldn't be pursuing truth or goodness or beauty through those means.
Yes, very good. Anything else that you want to say on alcohol before we hit the break here?
Yeah, I just agree with Chesterton. A man can desire an alcoholic drink without desiring the alcohol. Alcohol is a good, but it's not a good because it warps our brain.
Yes. Yeah, very well said. Yeah, How to Feel Good and How Not to, The Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs. That's the book. SophiaInstitute.com is the publisher. Great place to go to get the book, and the author is here with us, Dr. John-Mark Miravalle. If you want to get a call in on this, we're going to be talking about antidepressants and marijuana as well today, and various other aspects of all of this. Great book, but if you want to call any question on any of it, 1-877-511-5483, 1-877-511-5483. We'll be right back. Hey, if you're looking for some help with your daily prayer, I want to offer you 3 powerful prayers to start each day. In fact, these are the 3 prayers I lead my family in as part of our morning prayer every morning. To get these 3 powerful prayers to start each day, just go to the link in the description, and I've got a great looking simple PDF page you can print out and even post it on your refrigerator like I do if you wish. I hope these prayers help you as much as they are helping me. Now back to the show. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. John-Mark Miravalle, talking about his book, How to Feel Good and How Not to, The Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs. Get it wherever you find books, but highly recommend going to the publisher, SophiaInstitute.com. And John-Mark, you, as you were saying in the last segment, these 3 categories, they line up with what people are trying to do with these drugs. You write, it seems to me that there's an enormous moral difference between taking a substance for the sake of emotional manipulation, in which the goal of the act is to stimulate enjoyment by altering the brain, emotional therapy, in which the goal of the act is to reduce sorrow by altering the brain, and appreciative enjoyment, in which the goal of the act is to be delight in the objective goodness of what is being consumed. Talked about alcohol in the first segment. What about marijuana? What can you share with us as you sort of run it through these categories?
Yeah, it seems to me that there is some case where marijuana is used for a therapeutic purpose, which could be very legitimate. And we'll talk about that more probably when we talk about antidepressants. But the sort of default and standard associations with marijuana is to use it to feel good, so that when you smoke, you feel pleasure, or when you consume it in other ways, you feel pleasure. To generate pleasure by stimulating the brain. And that, it seems to me, like I said before, is a kind of hallucinatory enjoyment. It is to manipulate pleasure directly instead of in response to a perceived good. And pleasure is interesting. Pleasure is like lots of other things. Fame is a good example, or compliments. You should never seek it for its own sake. You should never seek it directly. It should only ever come as a side effect of having attained some good or some excellence. And when you go after pleasure directly, you actually pervert it. It's very similar actually to sexual pleasure. Sexual pleasure is supposed to be the effect of the goods of union and procreation. If you go after it directly, it becomes masturbatory and so sinful. And I think generally recreational drug use is associated with marijuana and so falls under that category. I should say marijuana is associated with recreational drug use and so generally falls into that category.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. Anything else you want to say about marijuana before we move on to antidepressants?
I mean, that's a big one. I'm sorry to say that many Catholics and even priests in the confessional, they based their rejection of marijuana on the fact that it was illegal. And now that it's illegal, they don't know what to do. And they say, well, I don't get it because it's not a sin to be buzzed, is it? In other words, so many Catholics for so long have been intemperate with alcohol that now they feel like they don't have a good moral basis for resisting recreational drug use of marijuana. And I think that's very scandalous. I think Catholics should have been doing a better job of treating alcohol as a regular drink instead of as a recreational stimulant, as a drug stimulant. And I think we need to get back our sort of healthy attitude to alcohol so that we can have a healthy rejection of recreational drug use in the form of marijuana.
Mm-hmm. And would this be one of the distinctions here as well when we're talking about alcohol as this third category, as you line them up here, this appreciative enjoyment in which the goal of the act is to delight in the objective goodness of what is being consumed, that when that's being done temperately with alcohol, that there is not, you're not reaching, you're not warping, you're not affecting your reason in a dramatic way. It's not crossing or even approaching a line of messing with your reason in a way that would be less human, I guess. I'm not sure exactly how to define it, what that line is, but with marijuana, you can't just sort of have that appreciative enjoyment of it, the objective goodness of it. There is more of an intoxicating effect, even with just you could take a sip of alcohol and have no intoxicating effect, or very slight for someone who might be very sensitive. But for marijuana, my understanding here would be that even a sip is going to have some pretty serious intoxicating effect. Is that some aspect of the nature of the drugs that would say the marijuana could not fall under this category of appreciative enjoyment?
So I would suggest to you that actually, even though that distinction is often made, that's actually not the core distinction. The core distinction is not how each one affects the intellect. The core distinction is how people use one versus the other relative to the emotions. So for instance, if I drink a glass of whiskey or a glass of wine and I don't notice an emotional change, a chemically stimulated emotional change, I do not feel disappointed. Whereas if somebody, smokes a joint or does a hit off a bong and they don't experience an emotional change, they would feel disappointment. That, I think, shows the difference, that one is trying to chemically manipulate their emotions and the other is not. Both may have greater or lesser impact on reason, but one is trying to warp your feelings and the other is not trying to warp your feelings. And I think that's a fundamental moral distinction.
Is that a difficult distinction, though, for somebody to be able to be self-aware about, like to know that, well, I'm not doing it in a way where I'm trying to just distort my emotions, but in effect, that is actually what they're trying to go for, and they're just not really being honest with themselves about it. Is that a difficult thing, I guess, to be honest about if somebody, especially if they're used to using one of these drugs in the wrong way?
I don't think it's too difficult. I think the basic question is, do you like the taste? If you like the taste and you're doing it because you like the taste, that's probably okay. If you like the taste, but you're disappointed anyway, that means you're not just doing it for the taste. You were hoping for something else. And that's a sign that you've got a problem.
And like in all things, yeah, you have to be honest with yourself. Don't try to deceive yourself just so you can have the thing you want to have, right? So, yeah, interesting.
Always.
Yeah. And so, all right. So that leads us to antidepressants. Very insightful aspect of this book. What would you like to tell us about antidepressants?
Oh, all kinds of things. But the main thing I want to tell you is not about antidepressants. It's about the nature of suffering and the fact that many Catholics, and certainly most other people, have horribly confused two problems, which are not the same at all. People sometimes talk about the problem of evil, and other times they talk about the problem of suffering. Evil is a problem. Suffering is not a problem. Why? Because suffering is defined as a response, and actually an appropriate response, to the presence of evil. So if there is evil in the world, there should be suffering. Suffering is not the problem. The goal of life is not to eliminate suffering. Otherwise, we could just drop nukes on everybody and that would be it. The goal of life is to eliminate evil. And part of eliminating evil involves the experience of suffering, which recognizes evil as bad, as evil, and motivates us to overcome it. So unfortunately, much of the contemporary world is determined to eradicate suffering instead of eradicate evil. And that is awful, because both on the human level and on the supernatural level, suffering is one of the greatest tools and weapons and resources we have in overcoming evil and ultimately in being saved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess share a little bit more about that, because you do make the distinction here. There is a point at which the suffering can become out of order, where it can, I guess, reach a level where it would be evil in the sense that it isn't rightly ordered. It's out of proportion. It's there's a point where some sort of a treatment would be needed. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so the analogy I really like is the one with dental pain. Let's say that I go to the dentist because my mouth hurts, and the dentist doesn't even look in my mouth. He just prescribes me some sort of pain medication. He says, this should take care of the pain. I would say, wait a minute, my pain is not the problem. My pain is what's alerting me to the problem. I would like you to address the problem, not the pain. The pain is actually fulfilling its proper function. So that's a kind of analogy for if people just treat their sorrow or their suffering or their depression as just an evil that needs to be medicated. That's not good. That's not paying attention to the suffering. That's not paying attention to the meaning of suffering. Now, it could be then, though, that the dentist looks inside my mouth and says, oh, I see the problem. You've got, an abscess. You're going to need a root canal. And I'm going to need to give you some painkiller so that you can sit still long enough for me to do the operation. Because otherwise, if I don't reduce your pain chemically, your pain will get out of control and become counterproductive and prevent the healing. So I think it is, at least in principle, legitimate, and certainly the church documents say this, to use drugs therapeutically to reduce an emotion that's gotten out of control, so that you can heal the problem that the emotion is alerting you to in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I guess apply that to antidepressants.
Oh, so again, if I go to a doctor with depression or some other serious emotional disorder, there may be a variety of means that the doctor would like to try. But if he says, listen, I need you to take this, it's going to calm you down so that we can talk through what your problems are and figure how to help. Because right now you're so keyed up. You're so either distressed or depressed or non-responsive. Maybe you're anxious. I need something that's going to reduce your out of control emotional state so we can talk through, and by the way, maybe with a priest pray through the things that are causing this distress. In other words, the medication would not be a solution to the problem, but it could be a legitimate temporary means of creating a kind of stasis so that the person could work on it, so that the therapist and the patient could together work on their problem and come to some sort of healing, after which hopefully they wouldn't need the drug. Although I do have to say, nobody who is listening to this, nobody, if you are on an antidepressant, should just go off their antidepressants. It is incredibly dangerous once you are on them to just go right off them. But eventually, we want to be able to live life with joy and suffering that isn't chemically dependent.
All right. Yeah, very important distinctions here with Dr. John-Mark Miravalle. Again, the book is called How to Feel Good and How Not to, The Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs, SophiaInstitute.com. And what you get in this book, as I think you're probably picking up, is, sure, you get the ethics of using these drugs, but at the same time, you really do get a much clearer understanding of just the anthropology, right? Just the way that we work, the way that we function, the way that we are truly meant to live as human beings. And there's a lot to understand about ourselves. So much. We're going to be back with more. Stay tuned. Hey, just a quick friendly reminder, if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like it with the thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for helping this channel to grow. God bless you. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John-Mark Miravalle, discussing his book, How to Feel Good and How Not to, SophiaInstitute.com. That's the publisher. Recommend that as a place to get the book, but you can find it wherever you find books. Again, How to Feel Good and How Not to. And John-Mark, you write before we move on from antidepressants, there's an aspect here I want to make sure that you flesh out for us, and that's when you get into the fact that there's no conclusive evidence indicating that these drugs are addressing the root cause of disordered sorrow, because there's no known neurological state that corresponds to depression in the first place. You write that antidepressants should only be used insofar as they facilitate finding and treating the root cause of depression. As you were saying in the previous segment, they should not be used as a substitute for finding and treating the problem. And you say, if the reason for the sorrow is in the soul, you're not going to take care of the problem by going after the body. Limiting yourself to a physical treatment for a spiritual ailment is missing the mark at a categorical level. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Here's a start. Pain is felt in the soul. Pain is experienced in the soul. That includes the pain of depression. That's why, for instance, a marble can't feel pain, and 20 marbles can't feel pain, and 100 marbles can't feel pain, because marbles aren't alive. Marbles don't have souls. A dead body could have a broken leg. A dead body couldn't be depressed. Depression pertains to the soul. And not only has there not been a biological marker for depression, but there's a real sense in which the only metric for depression is, do you feel depressed? So it is true, and I do want to emphasize this, it is true that a problem with the body could lead to depression in the soul. For instance, let's say you haven't slept in 3 nights. You might start feeling pretty depressed pretty quickly. Or again, let's go back to alcohol. Let's say you've had way too much to drink and now you're at the maudlin phase of your drunkenness. You're going to start feeling very generally depressed. But for sure, just as a drug cannot give you joy, because joy is the property of a soul, and rational joy is the property of a rational soul functioning well, so too a drug cannot take away your sorrows, because taking away sorrow means that you have attained the true good, the ultimate good, the good that is, in fact, union with Christ and ultimately, through his passion, union with his Father in heaven. So until that time comes, you are going to have a lot of sources of sorrow, no doubt about it, and a pill cannot take that away. As we said, if the sorrow becomes really counterproductive, a pill can maybe help you. And by the way, probably a lot of other things can help you too. But a pill can maybe help you get some mental space to start working on the truth you need to get well. But for sure, there is no biochemical test for depression. And actually, at the end of the day, there cannot be a biochemical test for depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting, very helpful. Anything else on antidepressants before we move on?
You know, I've always liked the section in the book where I list a large number of saints and talk about how if you evaluated their testimony according to the DSM, right, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the sort of way that people identify whether someone counts as quote unquote clinically depressed, an awful lot of the saints would count as depressed. Whether it's Augustine at the cusp of his conversion, or whether it's the mystics going through the dark night, whether it's St. Bernard of Clairvaux after he's just lost his brother. I think we have to reassess what we consider pathological, because at the end of the day, let's not forget, we worship a God who had an agony in the garden. We adore a God who modeled profound, intense, and to some extent, long-lasting sorrow. So we shouldn't be too quick to say, oh, this is a disorder, I've just got to get rid of it. Part of the Christian life, and especially during Lent, means leaning into our suffering.
Yeah, very, very, very important. And you do write here about it. You say, if the saints suffer such sorrow, even at the pinnacles of moral and spiritual excellence, it should make us hesitant to treat prolonged, profound suffering as an evil to be rid of no matter what. And again, you restate what you've stated here already earlier in the program. Suffering itself is not an evil. Again, evil is evil. Evil is the problem. Evil, whether physical, psychological, or spiritual, is the thing to eliminate. Salvation from evil is the central moral objective. So it's not salvation from suffering. That's not the central moral objective. It's salvation from evil. And that's a very important distinction to make. And so I guess I'd like to ask you this question: how to feel good, how not to. But just, I guess, how are we supposed to feel? What would you like to share just in our human experience? How are we supposed to feel? I see a lot, especially in the Catholic world, and maybe I assume I give it the benefit of the doubt, very well-meaning and probably very helpful in many ways. A lot about joy, saying we just got to be more joyful. And I get that. I understand that. But at the same time, we also have to be sorrowful about things that are sad as well. You make these points in the book too, and I always go to what St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 6:10, where he says, we are sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. These things go together, and yet the ultimate reality, though, is that God is love. He loves us. He is drawing us to him. He has given us this gift of himself in our Lord Jesus, in the Catholic Church, in the sacramental life, in the magisterial teachings. He just blesses us with grace upon grace. And yes, there are things real evils that we have to be sorrowful in the face of and angry about even at times. These are important emotions that are there for a reason to be rightly ordered. But at the same time, there's this overarching reality that is always there if we stay attentive to it. And that is one that ought to give us a disposition of humility, of gratitude, and that everything kind of subordinates to that. That's sort of, I guess, how I look at it, try to make sense of it all and of my human experience. But what can you share with us? What wisdom do you have for us on this today?
No, I think that's really right. The main thesis of my book, and this is something that's not mine. It's it's part of our patrimony as Catholics. It's in the Catechism, drawn from Aquinas, is that the emotions, just like the intellect and the will, are supposed to be conformed to reality. So, what is reality like? That will tell us how we should feel. What is the baseline of reality? What is the ultimate truth about reality? That God is good, that he has made a good world, that he has sent his Spirit to save us, and that he is going to triumph definitively one day. Good. So that should be our emotional baseline too. We should have the baseline of joy. That should be the normal Christian's normal attitude. And to the extent that it's not, we are not doing a great job witnessing, because our passions are belying what we claim to believe is the reality. On the other hand, we also know that in particular cases, there is going to be some real evil that we experience. Now, we've talked about this in earlier programs. I get real nervous when people spend a lot of time feeling sorrowful about stuff that doesn't really concern them. You know, Augustine, one of the things he was very embarrassed about was that he went to the play and he started weeping over a fictional character when he should have been worried about the state of his own soul. But there are times in our own life, with our kids, with our family members, and most importantly, with our own failings, and also with just natural stuff like sickness and ill health, and sickness and financial problems, whatever, where, yeah, this particular thing is going to be bad, and we are not only allowed, but we're supposed to feel bad about it. Those should be moments of punctuation that do not undermine the greater sense of joy based on the overall goodness of all reality. I like to think of Job. Job had good, wow, really bad with a lot of sorrow, and then good again. That, I think, is a good standard for what the Christian life should be. We should suffer well when it's time to suffer. When it's not, we should be rejoicing, and people should know it.
Yeah, well said. What about the idea that these passions can exist at the same time, and that there are maybe different levels that are operative at once? Maybe on the deepest level, yes, a joy, but then there's still this level, there's still another sort of a baseline of sorrow to the reality of all the rejection of God's love that is also a continual reality, and continual even in our own lives and in the ones that we love so much that are closest to us, and that is something that we are to be aware of and to be offering. I don't know, any thought on them sort of coexisting together?
No, that's absolutely right. Again, if our emotions correspond to reality, then the truth is that reality is mixed. There's good and bad. So Aquinas, he gives the example, I think he gives this particular example where he says, there's nothing wrong if a loved family member has died. It's right to feel sad. And if they've left you an inheritance, it's okay to feel a little happy. You shouldn't feel too happy that they died, because, of course, that would be disproportionate to the sorrow you ought to feel at the loss of a loved one. But the truth is that the reality is mixed, and you're allowed to feel sorrowful at the sorrowful aspect and happy at the joyful aspect. And that's going to be true as well in more sort of momentous, more important matters. Yeah, we feel, and I have to say, that's why I really liked the movie Inside Out, right? Because they did a nice job of saying that to live as an adult, with an adult emotional life, you have to be comfortable with a bittersweet blend. And that actually is a more sophisticated and deeper way to go through life.
Interesting. Yeah, I always like your movie recommendations. I think I've seen bits of that, but I've never seen the whole thing. So maybe I'll check it out. But what about also this idea? This has kind of stirred in me while reading the book as well. And that is sort of the damage that is being done, especially by young people when they're not given a formation of how they really work, how the emotions work, what they're supposed to be feeling and what they're supposed to be doing with that and ordering things and all of this, which is normal in our society. They're being given virtually nothing in most cases. And so they're just trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? How do I deal with this life? And then oftentimes when pain comes, especially deep pain, let alone the recreational uses, but they get involved in misusing alcohol or drugs. And then when they are doing that habitually, how that affects their emotions, and distorts things, where I guess I'll explain it like this, where now they're getting this artificial sort of euphoria, this high, and they're relieving sort of just the natural pain of daily living that is normal. And so then when they want to stop doing these things and they have to just go to being normal again, it's more painful than it would have been just naturally, because they're used to sort of numbing themselves from even the slightest of pains. And so now what would be probably easier to handle is it becomes much more difficult to be able to manage. Anyway, we'll get John-Mark's thoughts on that and more as we get into the final segment. But also want to keep the phone lines open. If you have a question, now's a great time to call in and make sure we get it to Dr. John-Mark Miravalle today. 1-877-511-5483. Again, the book, How to Feel Good and How Not to, The Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs. Anything along these lines you want to bring to the table, you want to ask, now's the time to do it. 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Again, get the book, learn it for yourself, be able to hand this on to the young people in your midst. SophiaInstitute.com is where you can find it. SophiaInstitute.com. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. John-Mark Miravalle. All right, just to simplify, I guess, that question from the end of the last segment, just to say, again, the book, How to Feel Good and How Not to. If one is going down the how not to path, they're abusing marijuana, alcohol, antidepressants, other mood-altering drugs, anything along those lines, but they're intending to use those things to feel good, to feel better, in the end, doesn't that actually, it's self-defeating, it actually makes them feel worse in the long run? Anything to say on that?
Again, our emotions, this is yet again the thesis of the whole book, our emotions should be regulated by reality. So many kids and their parents are told, unfortunately, that their emotions should be regulated by chemicals. And that means they deal with their bad emotions through chemicals. They deal with their good feelings through chemicals. They deal with their energetic feelings through chemicals. And that's really unfortunate, because not only does it create this, and this is one of the pontifical councils on, it came out with this thing on church drugs and drug addiction, and it said, look, if this is their only way of knowing how to not only get rid of bad emotions, but get good emotions, you're going to have a really downward spiral. I would put it this way too, though. I would say not only are you going to get a downward spiral of, I need these things all the time, and it's subject, like every chemical thing is, to the law of diminishing returns. So things are going to get worse and worse. But I think, in a sense, even more tragically, remember what our passions are for, our feelings of both sorrow and joy are for. They are motivators. That is energy to stimulate us towards the good and away from the evil. So what we do just by regulating them, either by repressing them or by artificially stimulating them, is we are taking away, we are stripping ourselves. We are, we're losing, we're almost neutering our energy for good. Because Aquinas says sorrow and joy, between the two of them, are the motivations for everything, to avoid sorrow and to pursue good. That is the primary motive force the Lord has given the human being for greatness. And why would you pursue the arduous good of greatness when you can just take a pill either to stop feeling bad or to start feeling good? It's just such a sad loss of our vitality. And that really makes me sad.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for writing this book. This is so important. I really hope people get this book and study it and apply it to their lives and hand it on to others. Again, these are just things that sadly so many of us have never really received a proper understanding of how our emotions function. Goes along with the show we had on Monday with Dr. Sue Bars and the work of Dr. Conrad Bars, Feeling and Healing the Emotions. You can go back and find that show as well. Another very, very helpful work to help us in this way. But I guess I'd like to prompt you, and feel free. I want to give you time to go wherever else you want to go before we conclude here. But you write a beautiful final bit here in the conclusion on our Queen Mother Mary as our model in all of this, and to what you were just speaking about as well, about how the emotions are meant to help us. And you write here at the end of part 3 of the book, you write that we shouldn't merely try to get ourselves or other people out of depression. We should work at getting into these delights. And you talk about these various delights, and you say, then the depression will have really been of great benefit, because it will have prompted a movement from less flourishing to more flourishing. It will have helped us to reach what we were really made for. So noticing the depression and saying, okay, I need to move and get myself into these delights. What would have been the delights? What jumps out to you in terms of the delights that our Blessed Mother would have been? She's perfectly ordered, but what were the delights that she would have been really diving into on a daily basis? What can we see in her model of how we can really get into various delights?
Yeah, thank you. That's a lovely question, and I love to talk about it because Mary, of course, is so traditionally appreciated, and rightly so, as the sorrowful mother, as a queen of sorrows. But we forget that she's also the one, who sings the hymn of joy when she meets with Elizabeth, right? Her spirit rejoices in God, her Savior. And I would suggest at the moment just a couple things, maybe 2 things, maybe the 2 biggest things that Mary shows us how to take joy, how to delight. Well, I'm going to go for 3 because I have another couple minutes, right? So I'm going to go for 3. So first of all, she knows that God does great and surprising things. She knows that the Lord fulfills. She celebrates the way the Lord fulfills his promises in unexpected ways. And, if you go back and look at other programs that Jim and I have done on beauty, that's what I think beauty is. Beauty is order and surprise. So a promise that's fulfilled in surprising ways, which is what the Lord is always doing, that's so joyful. That is pure beauty. And Mary is so excited that the Lord is finally going to fulfill his promise in a totally unexpected way. And she's happy that so point 2, she's so happy to be a part of that, even though she knows that she's just very, very small, right? She's a humble handmaid. The Lord has done great things for her and through her, and all generations will call her blessed, which is just wild to her because she knows that she's very small. She's not a big deal. And there's no better way to celebrate the good things God has done in your life than to remember that you don't deserve them. Mary didn't deserve the Immaculate Conception. She didn't deserve the divine motherhood. It was just God's gift. And because she knew she didn't deserve those good things, she was able to appreciate them. So first of all, God's creative and surprising generosity. 2, the fact that we're small and are not entitled to such good things. And then thirdly, I think you have to say family. Mary is so delighted in her family. She is so happy in her child. And she's not just happy in her family. She's happy in other families. One of her greatest signs that she wants to give us joy is the wedding at Cana. Wine is a celebratory drink. You shouldn't use it to stimulate artificial celebration, but you should have it because it's a good drink. Like cake is a good food, right? Like pizza is a good food. It's a celebratory thing because it's a good thing. And she says to her son, they have no wine, this wine which the psalmist says gladdens the heart of men. And that means, I would suggest, that means we should pray to Mary to take joy in the greatest natural good, which is our family. Sometimes, bizarrely enough, the hardest thing to take joy in is our kids and our marriage, even though those are the greatest natural gifts God has given us. They're the greatest supernatural gifts, in a sense, after himself. And so if we're struggling to feel joy in that gift, we need to ask Mary to intercede with the Lord to give us new wine, because, yeah, that's enough joy to last a lifetime. And we should be appreciating. We should be enjoying it.
Yeah, and you conclude that way so beautifully. You say, and she will turn to the king, and she'll tell him again what she told him so long ago. They have no wine, and he who refuses his mother nothing will again work his miracle, and again his disciples will celebrate. Dr. John-Mark Miravalle, what a blessing to have you with us once again. We are in less than a minute here, but any final comment for us today?
No, I just so appreciate you having me on. It's lovely to talk about the ultimate things with a good friend. So thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Again, the book, How to Feel Good and How Not to, the Ethics of Using Marijuana, Alcohol, Antidepressants, and Other Mood-Altering Drugs. Get it wherever you find books, but you can get it at the publisher's website, sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com, another great book from Sophia Institute Press. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me for anything, you can always do so by shooting me an email, jimh@thestationofthecross.com. God bless you. Hey, just a quick friendly reminder, if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like it with the thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for helping this channel to grow. God bless you.